I love reading true stories from history. I've just finished reading a book about HMS Erebus. It was a Royal Navy ship from the 1800s which tried to find the Northwest Passage and a way through the Arctic Sea. Unfortunately, they got trapped in the ice for 2 winters, and eventually all 129 men on board died, and there's some evidence that they may have even resorted to cannibalism in the end. At the moment, I'm reading the diary of Anne Frank, which tells the story of a Jewish family who hid in a top-floor annex for 2 years in Amsterdam before being found by the Nazis. Now, my family think I've got quite a boring taste in books, and maybe you think the same as well. But when you read a true story, I find it really powerful because you know that what you're reading actually happened to real people in real time. So how can we know that what was written about Jesus is true? How can we know that it actually took place and it's not just made up? Well, most of what we know about the life of Jesus is from 4 books in the New Testament. We call them the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. In particular, Matthew and Luke speak about the birth of Jesus and the Christmas story for us. Now, what do we know about these 4 men who wrote the Gospels? Well, we know that 2 of them, Matthew and John, were personal friends of Jesus. They were eyewitnesses to everything that they write about. We know that Mark and Luke weren't eyewitnesses, but they got their information from different ways. So Mark got his information from Peter, who was a friend of Jesus and an eyewitness of everything. Luke collated his information from all sorts of places and put it together in one volume that is his Gospel. Mark wrote his Gospel in about AD 470, so it's about 40 years after the death of Jesus. Matthew and Luke were 15 years after that, and then finally John another 5 years after that. So how do we know that they even remembered everything correctly? I mean, if Mark was the first to write his Gospel down, and that was 40 years after the death of Jesus, I mean, how do we know he remembered it? Because I might struggle to remember things from 40 years ago. I can struggle sometimes to remember things from this morning, let alone from the past. However, it's not really surprising, actually, that they might remember the details of what happened with Jesus. This was amazing stuff going on. We're not just talking about a trip to Sainsbury's that blends into all the other trips to Sainsbury's. We're talking about incredible, amazing things that happen, miracles, riots, a crucifixion, and so much more. I saw a 90-year-old lady on TV the other day. She was from London, and she was speaking about the Blitz and living through it. And she remembered so many details. She remembered what things looked like, how it felt, the sounds and the sights, what they did when the air raid siren went off. Those events were impressed on her memory from 80 years previously. So I think it's fair to say that the Gospel writers could remember things from earlier in their lives. Let's think for a moment about Mark, who wrote his first. Now, maybe around 40 years, as we say, after the death of Jesus. Or in other words, he wrote everything down while many of the eyewitnesses to the account were still alive. That's really important, because if Mark had written things down wrong, then it could have been challenged and would have been challenged by others who were eyewitnesses of what happened with Jesus. That's one of the reasons why there's so many details and so many people are named in the Gospels. It's like the writers are saying, if you don't believe me and what I'm writing, ask this person or ask that person. Ask Mary Magdalene. Ask Bartimaeus. Ask Zacchaeus. You can even check this with the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. You can take this right to the top if you like. And we have to remember that at this time in history, they had a very strong oral tradition of passing stories down, passing from generation to generation and from friend to friend. That's how they did it, because most people couldn't read and write, and they didn't have books in the way that we would have them anyway. So these stories were passed on accurately. They took care to pass them on. And we can see this in the level of kind of incidental detail that is mentioned in the accounts. People's names, place names, situations, numbers, the colours of things, a census that was taken under a particular Roman governor. Now you might think, well, okay, but they probably exaggerated things as they went on a bit. You know, just accidentally kind of made it sound a bit more impressive. It's easily done, isn't it? Well, the whole message of the Christian faith hinges on its biggest miracle claim, which is the resurrection of Jesus. That's the key element, and it's quite a wild, quite a big claim, isn't it? So if there was going to be some exaggeration, you'd expect that to be the thing that had been exaggerated. But what's amazing is that the resurrection of Jesus is a theme in the very earliest Christian writings. The Apostle Paul wrote letters even before the Gospels were written, and he writes about the resurrection as a theme way back then. It's not a claim that's been exaggerated over time. It was consistently reported all the way through and written down as it happened. And actually, there are loads of details that paint the early Christian leaders in a fairly bad light. I mean, the disciples regularly don't understand things. They get things wrong, they make mistakes, they don't believe things, they get themselves in a right mess a lot of the time. These are the kind of things that you'd expect them to airbrush out if you were going to make things try and look better and even exaggerate things a bit. Some of the accounts of Jesus you might think would be exaggerated to make them sound better, but actually, when you look at things like the Christmas story, it's not an exaggerated story. Jesus was born in a stable because there was no room in the inn. And the shepherds were the first people who were told about it. You know, if you wanted to exaggerate that story, you'd airbrush some of those details out and make it sound a bit better. But they're all there in the accounts because they are just as they happened. They are simply accounts of what took place. And just in case you're thinking, well, okay, maybe that is all right, but the New Testament has been changed probably over the years since then. You know, it's probably all just been adapted. Well, actually, we have so many ancient manuscripts and copies of the New Testament, more than for any other ancient book. And every time we find a new copy or a new manuscript or a new fragment and we put it together, it just serves to back up what we already know about Jesus. That actually the New Testament hasn't been changed as time has gone on. I think and I believe that when you read the gospel accounts of the life of Jesus, you are reading accurate historical accounts. Whether you believe it or not is up to you.